Hello and good morning, and you're welcome to today's Signpost webinar. We hope you're keeping safe and well wherever you're joining us from today. Today we'll be discussing water quality in the context of Ireland's Nitrates Action Programme and what does it mean for the wider agri-food sector. Now, we do know that nitrogen is a crucial nutrient that helps plants and crops grow, but high concentrations are harmful to people and nature. And excess nitrogen from agricultural sources is one of the main causes of water pollution in Europe. So the purpose of the Nitrates Action Programme is to prevent pollution of surface waters and groundwater from agricultural sources and to protect and improve water quality. And we're delighted to be joined by two important people who have responsibility for implementation of aspects of Ireland's Nitrates Action Programme. Ted Massey and Finbarr Regan are agricultural inspectors with the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. Ted and Finbarr, you're very welcome to this morning's webinar.
Thanks very much, Mark.
Good morning to you both. And to Pat Murphy, good morning to you. You're going to help us out with questions afterwards. So we're going to have two presentations from Finbarr and Ted this morning. Finbarr, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing in the department.
Yeah, Mark. So I suppose I spent years working in pesticides, and I've now moved into the fertilizers, feed, grain and poultry division with responsibility for fertilizers. So one of the things we're working on is the National Fertiliser Database. There's also new EU legislation on fertilizers, and we'll be working on our own legislation as well. So that should keep me busy for a while.
Brilliant. And you're going to share some slides with us about that shortly.
Yeah.
And Ted, could you tell us about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I am head of Nitrates and Biodiversity Division within the Department of Agriculture. So in terms of nitrates or water quality, I'm responsible working in conjunction with my colleagues in the Department of Housing for development of Ireland's Nitrates Action Programme. And then we're also responsible for enforcement or implementation as well within DAFM.
Okay, so you've got quite a broad brief there by the sounds of it. Great. Well, look, we look forward to talking to you afterwards, Ted, and you're going to give us a presentation also. So Finbarr, if you could share your slides with us, we'll get on with the presentations, and a reminder to everybody that you can submit your questions using the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try to go through as many of the questions as possible. Today's session is being recorded also, and will be available on the Teagasc YouTube channel along with the presentations as well. So Finbarr, we'll hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Can you see the presentation there?
Yeah, that looks perfect.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to speak about the National Fertiliser Database. This is something that's coming in. There's legislation going through the Oireachtas at the moment to allow us to do this. So the overview, I'm just looking at the aim, why we need a National Fertiliser Database, the legislation that's being worked on for it, the requirements both for fertilizer end users, which in the main will be farmers, and also for any retailers or fertilizer merchants, co-ops and so on. And I'll speak briefly about the IT system and how it's used by both sets of players. So aims of National Fertiliser Database. So we want to provide accurate tracking of sales of fertilizer through the whole supply chain, so from import to end user. This will enable us to achieve better compliance with water quality and environmental ambitions. Provide data for monitoring climate targets is another important aspect of this, as there are commitments under climate action programs, and fulfills the commitment to the European Commission and will be the key to securing any future nitrates derogation. I suppose the Commission have looked for this sort of system from member states who want to continue with the derogation. In time, it should simplify and provide reliable data to farmers for private sustainability schemes with co-ops and other businesses, and also department schemes, eco schemes, nitrates and liming. So the legislation, it's an amendment to the 1955 Fertiliser Act. It's been through the pre-legislative scrutiny, and the bill is due to commence second stage examination in the Oireachtas. So that's the stage it's at the moment, and there's a link if you want to have a look at the bill. It's combined with medicated feed as well, the veterinary medicinal products and medicated feed. That allowed us to get it through the system much more quickly than we would have otherwise, as that was quite advanced when we joined. So key requirements of the legislation: registration with the Department of Fertiliser Economic Operators. These are anyone who's selling the fertilizers, merchants, co-ops, and so on. We focus on, I suppose, merchants, co-ops, and fertilizer end users, farmers in the main. So they all have to register once the legislation is enacted. Selling fertilizer, you need to be registered if you're selling fertilizer, and you need to be registered to buy fertilizer. Now, there is an exception in terms of domestic use, those small kind of garden products, and that's dealt with in the legislation as well. Registration for farmers is a very straightforward process on ag food. And there's actually, I'll come to it later, but there are videos that our IT section have put up online to talk through what's involved with that on the system. So it is just a few clicks to accept, and you will be registered. Once you're registered, a unique identifier will be assigned in that system. For farmers, that will be the herd number. Fertilizer purchased by farmers from FVOs, it's the obligation of the merchant or the co-op to report that data to the department. So the co-ops and merchants will be uploading that information. Farmers don't have to do that. Reporting for farmers, the requirements are to report on-farm stock once a year. The date for that is yet to be decided, but it'll probably be in the autumn. Farm-to-farm sales or movements. So if there's movement between one farmer and another of fertilizer, we need to know that. And I suppose it's the physical movement of fertilizer and where fertilizer is present that we're interested in. And then direct imports of fertilizer directly onto farm from another country. Northern Ireland in the main would be the obvious one there, but there's other imports that go on directly onto farm from possibly the UK and other European countries. So that can be recorded on the system as well. So what information is required? And this is more for, again, this is for the merchants and co-ops. So who's it from? So the merchant and co-op unique identifier number will go in there. The product ID. So we have a product catalog set up at the moment, and there'll be a number attached to that. This will be a drop-down list for the merchants and co-ops, but there's also an option of incorporating that into their own systems and uploading it that way. Who it's sold to, so that would be a herd number for the most part. The quantity of fertilizer in tons, the date, and the date, I suppose, is the date of dispatch. It's not the date that a product is bought. It's when it actually physically leaves the merchant's yard and arrives in the farmer's yard. And then the transaction type, which can be sale or return. So if there's a problem with fertilizer, there is a facility to return that so that that's not counted in the farmer's numbers at the end of the year. And then there's original transaction ID. This is something that was looked for by co-ops. It may be easier for them to track with their own tracking number within the system if there is an issue. So methods of transmitting this data to the department. So one way is manual entry on ag food. This is fine if you're very small, but for medium to large businesses, it's probably not feasible. And we would encourage use of the API. The API, an application programming interface. I'm not an IT expert, but essentially what it allows you to do is for your system to talk to our system and upload data automatically. So you're no longer entering this stuff manually. So the API is available for testing. So that's details of it there. So if you email that email address, our IT people will get back to you with all the details of how to go about getting set up and testing that system. And we would encourage people to do that because it'll make life easier when the system goes live, to know that you are in a position where it will work for you quite quickly. This is just what it looks like in ag food for an FEU, which is a fertilizer end user. So this is what the farmer will see, or the agent or advisor, whoever has access to the system. So you can click on National Fertiliser Database there. And then when you go through that, and like I said, I'm giving quite a brief presentation today. Hopefully I'll come back and give more detail in the future in a couple of months' time. But there is a video online up on the website that talks through exactly what's involved by screenshots. goes through the system in detail, and it is quite simple. It's clicking. It's no more difficult than when you're going onto a website on your phone and you have to tick a box to say, you know, you're happy. That's exactly the same kind of thing. So it's very straightforward. The other aspect of it is there will be some data sharing. So there are provisions, and this is something that came up in the pre-legislative scrutiny. Some concerns about this, but other ministers of the government for performance of their functions. So we have to be very specific in what we're sharing and why we're sharing it and who we're sharing it with. And there would be data sharing agreements in place in terms of dealing with that data and the security of the data, and when that data is deleted from the systems. Third parties as well, prescribed by the minister to achieve environmental and sustainability targets. And just to reassure people that there are specific provisions to ensure safeguards around data sharing and compliance with all data protection legislation. So we will be obliged to comply with all that, and will. Communications to date, I suppose I didn't put this in, but Signpost is a good one to have as well. And I suppose this is just illustrating we presented to the Ground Limestone Association. There was Teagasc training, nutrient use efficiency course again. That would have been Mark Plunkett was the contact for that one, and Teagasc training of counter staff. And to be honest, that was a very interesting one because we got quite good feedback from the counter staff. So they were telling us where potential issues would arise with the implementation of this. So that was quite a useful one for us, as well as getting the message out there. And then the contractors conference, the Association of Farm and Forestry Contractors of Ireland, they invited us down. And again, there was a good discussion on possible issues. The ploughing match, we had a leaflet at that. And then again, the Tillage Edge podcast, that was Michael Hennessy, I think, and again, Teagasc. So Teagasc have been very helpful to us in getting our message out there. We also have a stakeholder consultative group. So that's representative bodies that met 4 times last year. Again, good discussions and good feedback in that. And we did tweak the system based on those meetings. And then there was an IT steering group meeting as well, just discussing how to go about connecting with the IT side of things. And just to, I'm nearly finished, I think now, further information, that's just a website there. And on the website, you'll have an overview of the database, the consultative committee meetings that I've mentioned. There's agendas and minutes on there. There's a note, just an overview, a page or two, and also frequently asked questions. So all the questions we've been asked to date at the various different presentations and meetings, we've put all those in there with the answer to them as well. Pre-legislative scrutiny report, the draft fertilizer product catalogue. That's not quite finished yet, but it's just a PDF of what it will look like. And then there's information videos from IT. That's my timer making noise there, sorry. Information videos on the system for end users, agents and merchants. Just to say, the videos were put up as for end users and merchants, but obviously agents and advisors who have access to the system will have the same access and will be able to do the same things as the farmer. Okay, thank you very much.
That's great, Finbarr. Thanks very much, and thanks for keeping on time. And look, there's no doubt that this will have fairly far-reaching implications for the sector. So I think it's really important to get out early with the information. So there are questions coming through, and we maybe hold those till after your Ted's presentation. So Ted,
Cheers.
We'll hand over to you, and we'll take your slides. We've got a huge crowd this morning. I think we've a record-breaking crowd this morning, over 600 people joining us online this morning. So obviously there's huge interest in this topic because of the implications it has for the sector. So so Ted, we'll hand over to you, and we'll take questions after.
Now, Mark, can you see that slide okay?
That's perfect.
Great, okay.
Now,
So
you've stopped sharing there, Ted. I think.
Oh, sorry, hang on a sec.
Stop sharing.
Okay, just bear with me for a moment. Now, again, yeah, okay, you can see that now?
Yeah, that's excellent.
Very good. Well, right, good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk about the changes under the Nitrates Action Programme, and then looking at the derogation in the longer term as well. But I suppose to begin with, I'm going to set a little bit of the background out. So the Nitrates Directive, we're going back to legislation that was introduced in the 1990s, and it set out two objectives, and they were to reduce and prevent water pollution caused by agriculture. The directive sets a limit of a maximum of 170 kilograms of livestock manure nitrogen per hectare, but it does go on to say that a higher limit may be allowed, provided that it's justified and it won't prejudice achievement of the objectives of the directive. So you can go above 170 if you've justified circumstances, such as our long grass growing season, our high rainfall levels. But that is predicated on ensuring that you are still reducing and preventing water pollution caused by agriculture. So under the directive, each member state must draw up a Nitrates Action Programme. And our first Nitrates Action Programme came into effect in 2006. It gives effect to the nitrates regulations. It's designed to prevent pollution of watercourses from agricultural sources, covering both nitrogen and phosphorus. And ultimately, it's designed to protect and improve water quality. So in line with the directive, the Nitrates Action Programme is reviewed every 4 years, with the most recent reviews taking place in 2017 and 2021. And the Nitrates Action Programme is given legal effect through the Good Agricultural Practice for Protection of Waters regulations, or what's commonly known as the GAP regs or the nitrates regs. So to look at the background to the last review, the review that took place in 2021, compared to the previous review in 2017, nationally, our chemical fertilizer use was up by in the region of 30 to 40,000 tonnes per annum. And the dairy herd was growing. Between 2017 and 2021, there was a 12% increase in dairy cow numbers. And those cows were becoming increasingly concentrated in the south and the southeast of the country. So to look at water quality and how things were going in that regard, this is 2020 data. There is more recent data from the EPA, but this is the data that we had when that review was taking place in 21. So if you look at the slide on the left, it covers river nitrate. And you can see that 47% or almost half of our rivers had unsatisfactory levels of river nitrate. And the trends weren't good. 38% or 2 in 5 were showing an increasing river nitrate trend. On the phosphorus side, 29% or almost a third of our rivers had unsatisfactory levels of phosphorus. And again, in terms of trends, around 24% or a quarter were showing an increasing trend. And if we look at the more recent data, that phosphorus trend is the only real change. The number of rivers with an increasing trend for phosphorus has dropped back to 17%, but that is still 1 in 6 of our rivers. And if we look at the ecological status of our water in the most recent EPA report, almost 50% of our waters have less than good ecological status. So looking at those trends and thinking back to the Nitrates Directive around the objectives of preventing and reducing pollution, there was a clear need to stabilize and then reverse those negative trends in terms of water quality. And that's an issue for all farmers, because if we reflect on it, the quality of the water in any catchment is representative of the cumulative impact of all pressures on that catchment. So it could be septic tanks, it could be urban wastewater treatment plants, it could be agriculture. But it's all farms and all sectors of agriculture. To address water quality, it's not an issue of derogation versus non-derogation, dairy versus dry stock, livestock versus tillage. It's an issue for all farmers to play their part in reducing the loss of nutrients to water and seeking to reverse those trends. So with those trends in mind, and given the background, we had to implement stronger measures for the protection of water quality. And I suppose I'm now going to focus on the changes that have become applicable from this year, because within the Nitrates Action Programme, certain existing measures were retained, some new measures were introduced, and other measures were expanded to become applicable to more farmers over time. So to look at the closed period for slurry and chemical fertiliser, the closed period for slurry this year starts on the 1st of October. So that's 2 weeks earlier than it had been under the previous Nitrates Action Programme. And, essentially the best advice to farmers is get your slurry out in appropriate weather and soil conditions in the spring to get the maximum value from it. But ultimately, under regulation, that slurry should all be spread before the end of September. In terms of chemical fertiliser application, the time when fertiliser may be spread in the spring is essentially put back by 2 weeks. So the closed period for chemical fertiliser this year now ends on the 26th of January in Zone A, the 29th of January in Zone B, and the 14th of February in Zone C. And there are now predefined scientific criteria that will allow an extension of the slurry spreading season up to potentially the 15th of October, or that will allow earlier chemical fertiliser application from those original dates in mid-January onwards. But these criteria only become applicable in exceptional circumstances, and ultimately that will be a ministerial decision for the Minister for Housing in consultation with the Minister for Agriculture. To reduce losses, we're keen to get more efficient use of our slurry and our organic manures. So low emission slurry spreading is becoming compulsory for an expanding cohort of farmers. And from this year, it applies to everyone with a grassland stocking rate of 150 kilograms nitrogen or above. Next year, it's applicable to everyone above 130, and in 2025, applicable for everyone farming at over 100 kilos. And at this stage now, low emission slurry spreading must be used for all pig slurry applications and all applications to arable land, unless that slurry is being incorporated within 24 hours. We also have changes regarding soil water storage and management for dairy farmers. So now, this December, we will have a 3-week close period for soil water, and that expands to the full month of December in 2024, with the exception of those farmers who are involved in winter milk, who have a winter milk supply contract with their processor, who have until December 25 to have that full close period. And the soil water storage requirements increase in line with that. And why? Well, because December is the riskiest period in terms of application of nutrients to land. From this year, we're introducing banding of excretion rates for dairy cows. And this is something the Commission asked us to consider and include in our Nitrates Action Programme. And the reason for that is because not all cows are equal. The cow's excretion rate will depend on the genetics of the cow and how she is managed. And the science shows us as milk yield increases, the cow's excretion rate will also increase. So each herd will be assigned to one of 3 bands each year. Some herds will be assigned to the low band of 80 kilograms of nitrogen per head. Most herds, we reckon around 2/3 of herds, will be in the middle band, which will be assigned to 92 kilograms of nitrogen. And for band 3, those high yielding herds, they'll be assigned to 106 kilograms of nitrogen per cow per year. And that is a significant change from the current overall excretion rate of 89 kilograms that was applicable up to 22. So how are we going to calculate this? Well, it'll be based on the herd's average milk yield over either the previous 3 years or for the preceding year. So for example, for 2023 banding, it's the years 2021, 2020, 21 and 22, if the farmer wants to opt for the 3-year average, or it's the year 2022, the most recent year. And that dairy co-op data will be combined with animal number data from our AIM database to determine the average milk yield per cow in the herd for each year. Farmers will have two ways to confirm their band to us. For those farmers whose milk data is being transferred to ICBF, and that is the majority of farmers, they will be able to go online on the ICBF website, look at the calculations, look at the banding, and be able to confirm which option they wish to select. For farmers whose co-ops are not maybe transferring data to ICBF, or if the farmer hasn't given consent, they have the option of using a paper form, but that will be more onerous on the farmer. They'll have to go to their milk purchaser, get the form completed, and get milk statements for the previous 3 years. They'll then have to submit that to us. We'll have to combine that with the farm's AIM data to come up with the average yield, and then advise the farmer of the band. So the preference and the long-term option for all farmers should be to use ICBF. The reason ICBF have developed that portal is because farmers were coming to them last summer and asking them about banding, would they be able to confirm it, because farmers knew ICBF had all their data. And so ICBF approached us with a view to providing this as a service for farmers. For farmers who choose not to engage in either of those options, they will be defaulted to the high band until they submit information to prove otherwise to us. And the reason for that is that a farmer who chooses not to engage should never be at an advantage over the farmers who do choose to engage and follow the legislation. To look at soil sampling then, soil sampling is becoming mandatory for an increasing cohort of farmers. And from this year, all farmers with a grassland stocking rate above 130 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare must take soil samples. And for arable farmers, all sown arable land must be soil sampled. Where soil samples are not taken, the farmer has to assume a phosphorus index of 4. And that means there are implications in terms of chemical fertilizer use. In most cases, chemical phosphorus will not be permitted. And there are also implications for farmers who wish to import organic manures. There are increasing requirements around buffer strips. So on tillage land, the regulations introduced last year introduced a 6-meter buffer strip requirement for the protection of intersecting watercourses. So that is where the field is draining down into the watercourse, and there's a late harvested crop being sown. For farmers who are going to plough land for main crop potatoes, maize, sugar beet, fodder beet, they have to leave an uncultivated 6-meter buffer adjacent to the watercourse in that scenario. There previously was a 2-meter buffer strip requirement for arable crops, and that buffer strip requirement, again, to be left untilled, is expanded to 3 meters from the 1st of January this year to align with the CAP strategic plan regulation. And in line with that regulation, the buffer strip applicable for the application of chemical fertilizer adjacent to surface water is also increased to 3 meters for all land with effect from the start of this year. There are other gap measures as well, but I suppose the most significant change relates to the storage of silage bales. So from this year, in the absence of suitable facilities for the collection and storage of silage effluent, silage bales must not be stored any more than 2 bales high. And obviously the requirements around the setback distance from surface waters or abstraction points continue for silage storage as well. In recent weeks, there has been some commentary in the media around a reduction in the maximum chemical nitrogen allowances for grassland, but that reduction was applicable last year, and there is no further reduction in chemical nitrogen allowances for this year. Okay, that 10% reduction was applicable from March of last year. There are also a number of non-GAP measures outside the regulations that are included in the Nitrates Action Programme. For example, the Fertiliser Sales Database that Finbarr has talked about already. And there are measures around improving compliance and enforcement. So last year, the Commission required us to increase our inspection rate for derogation farmers from 5% of inspections per annum to 10% of farmers per annum. So last year that meant we had to go from inspecting around 350 to inspecting 700 derogation farmers, and that will continue. That is a requirement of the Commission's extension of our derogation. But separate to that, the local authorities are also developing a National Agriculture Inspection Programme through the EPA, and that aims to increase the number of local authority inspections on farm, standardize those inspections in terms of their approach and their reporting, and move them to a more consistent and more effective risk basis. And I suppose the other thing then is within DAFM, we are also doing a number of rapid field visits now at this time of year, where we're going on farm, doing quick farmyard inspections to check compliance with the regulations. The ASSA programme, or the Agricultural Sustainability Support and Advisory Programme, continues. And outside of the NAP, we have two significant measures. An EIP to improve water quality on farm by providing funding for the first time to assist farmers to develop requirements that go beyond baseline regulatory requirements. So that is a fund of €50 million for on-farm investments over the next 5 years. And that fund is separate to the budget for the administration of that EIP. And the budget last year introduced accelerated capital allowances for capital investments in slurry storage infrastructure. And that's applicable from the start of January this year and should be available for the next 3 years. Now that is, you might have seen some commentary in the media in recent days around that. The legislation at the moment sets out it's due to apply till the end of June, but that is due to be amended when the EU state aid rules are finalised. So that legislation will be amended and will extend that. Looking to the future then, this year we have to conduct an interim review of our Nitrates Action Programme. And the idea of the interim review is to look at the effectiveness of the measures we have in place and to consider whether any new measures are required in light of changes in farm practices or changes in water quality data. So we've an open mind regarding that review, but 3 things were flagged in the original Nitrates Action Programme that we have to look at as part of the review. And they are to consider the covering of external slurry stores, to conduct a review of the application of sludge and industrial waste to land, and potentially a further reduction in chemical nitrogen allowances. So then to move on, just to talk about the nitrates derogation. And I suppose most of you are probably aware at this stage, Ireland is one of only 3.5 EU member states with a derogation. The other member states that currently have a derogation are the Netherlands, Denmark, and the Flanders region within Belgium. At this stage, all other member states have either given up on seeking a derogation or have been refused a derogation by the Commission. And the derogation that the Dutch have at present very clearly sets out a trajectory to transition them out of derogation by the end of 2025 and states that they will not be granted a further derogation. So from our perspective, the next time we go to seek an extension to our derogation, at best case scenario, it's likely to be ourselves, the Danes, and that Flanders region within Belgium that will have a derogation. So to look at the current derogation, back in March, we secured an extension of our derogation to cover the period 2022 to 2025. But looking back at our water quality trends, our increasing fertiliser use, our increasing livestock numbers, and the objective of the Nitrates Directive, that in granting a derogation, the Commission had to be assured it would have no negative impacts on water quality. In light of all of that, the Commission imposed additional conditionality on us. And in their implementing decision, one element of that additional conditionality was the requirement for us to undertake a 2-year water quality review in 2023. And that's effectively comparing water quality data that the EPA have for 2021 with data for 2022. And where that review identifies polluted waters or where there are worsening trends in water quality, the maximum stocking rate on farms in that catchment must reduce from the current 250 kilograms of livestock nitrogen back to a maximum of 220 kilograms from 2024 onwards. So we don't yet have 2022 data, and the EPA are still analysing that. We would hope to have it for early summer. So at this stage, we don't know what the outcome of the review will be. But there is a risk that significant areas and potentially all of the country could see itself moving to a maximum stocking rate of 220 kilograms nitrogen from 2024 onwards. The Commission implementing decision sets out that that review must be concluded by the end of September 2023. And for us going back to the Commission and seeking a further extension to our nitrates derogation in 2025, water quality is going to be critical for us. We can argue, and we will argue, that Ireland is unique. We have a grass-based system, very different to our continental European colleagues. However, if we don't see a reversal of those negative trends in water quality, it'll become very difficult for us to secure an extension to our nitrates derogation, in particular where there are less and less countries in receipt of a derogation. So to conclude, we all need to work together to stabilise and reverse the recent negative trends in water quality. As I said, water quality in a catchment reflects the cumulative impact of all pressures on that catchment. And so water quality is an issue for every farmer and every farming sector within Irish agriculture. So if you're a farmer or if you're involved in dealing with farmers, it's to ask yourself, well, what can you do to try and improve our water quality with a view to securing our industry into the future? Now, that's it. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Ted, and very clear presentation there. So it's great that we'll have that available on the Teagasc website afterwards for people to review. And we are getting a huge amount of questions, and really excellent questions. So do keep the questions coming, because I think it'll be useful for Ted and for Finbarr to have those questions that maybe could be added to a frequently asked questions around this whole topic, because there's a lot of new things here for people. Just I suppose my own question relates to those farmers that are, let's say, that are reliant on an agricultural advisor to do a lot of their interactions with ag food and so forth. Is that how do those farmers, will they interact with that, or is there a role here for the co-ops and so on to assist farmers in complying with these regulations?
Yeah, I would say there's a role for everyone who's working in the sector to try and improve compliance. There is a need to improve compliance, and when we were meeting the Commission to negotiate the extension to our derogation, they were very clear that we had to improve compliance and improve enforcement, and they insisted on us moving to that 10% inspection rate. Mm-hmm. And they also insisted on other measures, and that's why the EPA are working with the local authorities to expand things. But there is also certainly a role for co-ops and sustainability bonus schemes to try and improve the sustainability of Irish agriculture.
And do we have a figure on the number of farmers that are above 130 kilograms of nitrogen that will be required to take soil samples?
I don't have that figure to hand, but I mean, a lot of our dry stock farmers are farming at less than 130 kilograms. A lot of them are farming at less than 100 kilograms. We have in recent years, around about 12,000 farmers farming at over 170. they've already been required to take soil samples anyway. So it's this cohort that are above 130 and are arable farmers as well, who are now obliged to take soil samples.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ted. Okay, in the interest of time, I think we'll get straight to the questions. Finbarr and Ted, in the interest of trying to maybe get through as many as we can, if we could try and keep the responses as concise as possible. Pat, I can see you're
there's a lot of
a few of them together.
Yeah, a lot of quick questions. And for Finbarr first, can farmers sell to each other fertilizer?
Yes, they can. There's a farm-to-farm movement, and there's a further registration for that, which again is just a simple tick box once you're in ag food, to allow you to be able to import and also transfer farm to farm.
There's a couple of questions then around the ability of the co-ops to use the data for sustainability purposes, and I suppose a question around what exactly will a co-op be able to see in relation to a farmer's data.
Okay, I suppose an example, the only one I can think of off the top of my head now is where a co-op may reward farmers for using inhibited urea products. So I suppose what would be known as protected urea. So in that case, all we'd probably need to share is the percentage protected urea used in the overall sense, and then there'd be some sort of bonus for the supplier in that. That's the only one I can think of right now, but just to say that any data that's being shared, that will go through the proper channels, and there will be checks and balances on that. It will comply with all data protection legislation. So there won't be an issue from that standpoint. And I suppose what we share is as little as possible to achieve the goal. That's it.
And am I right in assuming that a co-op will only see the data that they supplied for that farmer? They won't, if I'm dealing with two merchants, they won't see each other's data.
No, the merchants will download their own data, but I suppose for the overall, like the example I gave, all the information would be together, but it would just be giving a percentage. So there'd be no information of commercial sensitivity in that.
What about farmers in border counties whose local merchant may be across the border?
Yeah, we have spoken with Northern Ireland, and they're not in a position. They like the idea of what we're doing, and they probably will follow suit, but they can't do it as quickly as we can. So the facility is there in the system for the farmer to input that information themselves onto the system if they're importing directly onto farm. If merchants are importing, then that's captured in the sales, but there is also imports will be captured on the system, whether it's merchants or the Yaras and the Gouldings of this world as well. They'll be all captured.
Can I just ask in relation to farmers knowing their limit, and how do they know if they're sailing close to the wind, or will there be any notifications around that, Finbarr?
There won't be, because I suppose this is sales. So I suppose how the information we'll have is we'll have an opening stock from a farmer, the sales to that farmer, and a closing stock. So once we have all that data, we can give the annual figure, if you like, of what was used on that particular farm. So I suppose there is no interim data, and I suppose realistically, data will come from industry. Say the January data, all their sales. They'll reconcile that in their own books. They'll do their own checks and balances. And then in February, they'll upload it onto our system. So it'll be a few weeks behind. So I suppose the onus is still on the farmer to know where they're at with their limits. And there is no obligation on retailers, co-ops or merchants to have any idea of any of that. They're just selling it. And the responsibility is with the farmer to ensure they stay within limits.
So the farmer still will they'll have to calculate what their limits are for the year themselves, and be sure that that's their stocks align with that or what they've spread.
Yeah, exactly.
And I suppose a couple of questions there in relation to what farmers have to do immediately. And I'm assuming there's nothing they have to do at the moment, but that does mean that when it comes to next year producing records, there won't necessarily be a full record on the system for 2023.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case, and I suppose there's pros and cons to that. We just have to accept that is the case now, Pat, as you rightly say. And I suppose what we would say is that it gives us time to get everyone into the system, get the kinks ironed out, and then we'd be good to go for the next fertilizer year.
Will lime sales be recorded?
Yes, they will.
And I suppose just to follow on from the other, have you any idea as to the likely date for startup?
I don't. I've spoken to my expert in the legal sphere, and we'll just have to wait. And as soon as we have information, we will communicate that out through the stakeholder groups and any other avenue we can find. To be honest, we will communicate that, but we don't have a definite date as yet. But we've done what we can do. It's going through the Oireachtas. It's in the system. So as soon as we know, we'll get that information out.
Okay. What level of access will advisors have on behalf of their farmers to the database?
Yeah, advisors, once the farmer gives them that access, they will have the same access as the farmer. So they can go into the system. So if your advisor is doing this for you, he'll be able to go in and do everything that needs to be done. Now, the thing to remember is once you're registered, unless you're importing from outside the state or you're transferring farm to farm, your only interaction really is to record the stock on farm on a particular date. As I say, sometime in autumn. It hasn't been fully decided yet, and that will be the only interaction for the vast majority of farmers.
Just in terms of the fertilizer register and the level of inspection on fertilizers, given that you will have a very strong level of information, will that lead to a reduction in the amount of inspections on that particular topic?
Yeah, I've asked the Integrated Controls Division about this, and they're kind of obliged to have a 1% checking on this. So it's what is it called? Conditionality inspections. But I suppose this area is easily checked if someone's on farm checking something else. So I'm sure Ted would be delighted to be checking additional things when he's out there anyway.
Yeah, and I suppose just to come in on that, like when the National Fertiliser Sales Database is up and running and is in a position to provide reliable data for the likes of the derogation farmers, they will no longer have to submit fertilizer records to ourselves, because we'll have all that information. So that'll make things a lot easier for the Teagasc or the private agricultural advisors and for the farmers as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Finbarr. I think that's most of your inquisition. We'll move over to Ted for his now.
Okay, just to say before I finish, Ted mentioned the countries with derogation, and I was talking to my Danish colleagues, and they have pretty much the same system as what we're trying to set up in place at the moment. They're trying to tweak it, but it is essentially what we're trying to do, the same sort of system.
Okay, first question is just for clarity. The stocking rate limits for soil sampling, is this a grassland stocking rate or a whole farm stocking rate? It's
the grassland stocking rate, and it's the stocking rate in the previous year. So the farmer can look at their 2022 stocking rate on grassland and then decide whether they need to do soil sampling. I suppose a question there, the regulation changes that have come into place in the last couple of years and the ones that are coming into place now, in your view, will sufficient time be given to allow those to have an impact before further decisions are made, or are we in a bit of a bind in relation to that? That's probably the biggest challenge we have, because I would say we now have a robust set of measures that you know, if farmers comply with them, we are going to see improvements in water quality. But the challenge is the lag time between when we implement a measure and when we see the full effect. And you know this, Pat. I mean, that'll vary from 1 to 10 years, maybe even longer. And you know, that is a challenge for us in negotiating with the Commission, because they say they don't have time. So that is a very topical issue.
In relation to the soil sampling and when that has to be completed by, what's the schedule there, Ted?
Well, the soil sample will be valid for 4 years, but if there is a farmer who now has land that is obliged to be subject to soil sampling, they have to assume a phosphorus index of 4 in the absence of that soil sample result. Okay, so it's for the farmer to decide when they want to sample. But if they want to import slurry, or they want to buy chemical fertilizer for that land, they need to be conscious they may not have a sample for it.
And do farmers have to be a member of Herd Plus to access the milk yield data, or tick the box to give the department access to the data?
No, all farmers will be able to access the ICBF website if they wish. And then the question is, does ICBF have their data? But the majority of the co-ops transfer data. You know, there will be some farmers that have advised their co-op they don't have permission to transfer data to ICBF. So they will have to either give the co-op the consent, or else they will have to do a paper return to ourselves.
And will farmers over the 130 kilograms nitrogen per hectare, will they be contacted by the department about the requirement to soil sample? How will that work?
Yeah, I suppose a challenge for us is that we look at all livestock on the holding in terms of determining the grassland stocking rate. So we have cattle only data at the moment. So a farmer can log into AgFood and they can see their nitrates levels in terms of cattle only. But then we have to combine that with the likes of sheep. So where there's a mixed enterprise, we have to get sheep census data. So it'll be later in the year that we'll be able to say exactly who was over 130. That becomes an issue obviously for us in terms of our compliance. But we intend to send an SMS message to all farmers over something in the region of say 120 to advise them that if they consider themselves to be over 130 for last year, you know, they should take soil samples.
Okay, that makes sense.
In terms of cow banding, will the option for preceding year always be available?
Yes, and like it's very important. The band applies for 1 year, and then it is reviewed based on the more recent data.
What organic N value will be allocated to cull cows being finished in non-dairy in a beef finishing herd?
If it's an animal in a beef finishing herd, it's at 65 kilograms. A bovine animal over 2 years. If it's retained in the dairy herd, it continues to be a dairy cow because we want to keep things as simple as possible for farmers.
Okay, there's always a little bit of contention about the marked lines in relation to the surface waters for the 3 meter. Is there an exact definition of that?
Yeah, so if the watercourse is marked on a 1 to 5,000 ordnance survey map or a higher scale ordnance survey map, higher definition map, then it counts as a water where you have to have those buffer strips.
As well, a question there in relation to inspections for soil water storage in December. What extra inspections are you proposing to cover that period? And what other measures, I'll lump two together, what other measures or increased measures are there around surveillance of slurry spreading in that closed period? Well,
I suppose in terms of our inspections, and the local authorities inspections, like they go on an annual basis. So, you know, we will be out on farms in December, as will the local authorities. We are doing an increased cohort of these farmyard inspections now through our colleagues in integrated controls in the period between January and March of this year. So we'll just have to see how things develop in terms of that space.
I can safely say we're not going to get through all of the questions here this morning because of the level of interest in today's session. So we will continue. We'll continue and get through as many of them possible. Just a question I have in relation to the grants available for the low emission slurry spreading. Will they continue to be available after 2025, or how will that work? Should farmers who are going to be required to use LESS, will the grant be available to them, or if not, should they get going on that as soon as possible?
Yeah, essentially, once something becomes mandatory under regulation, you're constrained in terms of the grant aid you can provide. The legislation does allow for something to be grant aided for a period of up to 24 months after it has become mandatory. So in the longer term, low emission slurry spreading capital investment grants will only be available to those farmers that are stocked at less than 100 kilograms of organic nitrogen.
Okay, thanks, Ted.
A question: when will farmers know their banding status if they give permission to use the data?
Yeah, I suppose at this stage the co-ops are finalising processing of the milk data for December, and we expect in early February that that ICBF should have that data and be in a position to share it with farmers. We will also be writing to farmers very shortly to communicate on banding, just how exactly that process will work and the options available to farmers.
Okay, in terms of the size of buffer strips for fodder crops such as kale for livestock grazing over the winter, what's the requirement there?
Now, you have me there, Pat, I'll admit. I'm not out on the ground inspecting those crops. I know there are buffer strip requirements and there are lie-back requirements as well. You know, and again, it goes back to, in particular, avoiding the transfer of sediment, you know, runoff of soil particles and in particular phosphorus to water.
We're quite commenting here. I think we'll take it as a comment. It says it would be helpful if the processors in their sustainability payments incentivized low and reduced nitrogen use rather than payment for purchasing protected urea. It penalizes farmers who are reducing their end usage and gives the wrong signal to farmers. This is in the context of the everyone has a role to play comment, I think, that you made earlier, Ted. So I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, well, it's a very valid comment. And like, if we look at the outcome of the dairy vision and the beef and lamb groups work under food vision, you know, they have set out ambitious targets for fertilizer reduction. And, you know, ultimately, if we want to get to a more sustainable system, both economically and environmentally, we do have to look at reducing our fertilizer use. It's not just a question of changing from one form to another.
Yeah, sorry, can I just say, I just pulled that example off the top of my head. It is a possibility. There's obviously also overall reduction in nitrogen would be in there as well. And just to say that there will be, you know, there's a lot of data, useful data that will be collected by the National Fertiliser Database that will reduce, as Ted has said, it will reduce the administrative burden long term on farmers. There's
a couple of questions about the handling of mixed breeds or dual purpose breeds in dairy herds. How are they going to be identified as dairy?
Yeah, so I suppose farmers who are registered with ICBF may be doing milk recording. They'll already have milk recording data for those cows. From our perspective, if it's a cow in a dairy herd, we're proposing that all cows count, but there will be some herds where there's maybe mixed enterprises. For example, there's a small number of suckler cows on a dairy farm, and I suppose it's cases like that we will have to probably address on a case-by-case basis. But for the majority of dairy farmers, they're only running dairy cows.
Okay. The Commission implementing decision for the derogation also looks at waters that are eutrophic or at risk of becoming eutrophic. Is this not a bigger concern than the trends between 2021 and 2022?
Yeah, I suppose there are four elements to your water quality review. The first two relate to nitrates and nitrates trends, and the other one relates to eutrophic or could become eutrophic with a stable or worsening trend. The Commission implementing decision requires us to look at 21 versus 22. And it's when you put those four tests together, you have the outcome. If a catchment fails any one of those four tests, that catchment has to move to the maximum of 220. So it's nitrogen and eutrophic status are the issues there.
A farmer that came in under 120 kilograms grass and stocking rate for organic N in 2022, but wants to import slurry in 2023, do they need the soil sample?
No, because they were under 120 for last year. The requirement applies to people who are above 130 for last year.
And presumably the import of slurry doesn't affect their grassland stocking rate. That would be their whole farm stocking rate, if I'm not wrong on that.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have to probably make this one the last one, Pat.
Okay. Can a farmer choose previous year in 2023 and switch to 3-year average in the next year?
Yeah, in terms of banding, each year is a new start. So the data rolls on next January, February, the farmer will confirm their band for 2024.
Okay. There's still a lot of questions. I suppose there will be a number of opportunities again to get questions to you. I think, Mark, what we will try and do is take a look at the questions that are left, and maybe Ted, if we could maybe just put a few of those questions to you and send them out to viewers, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, certainly. We are developing an FAQ around banding. So we're keen to hear anyone's questions, be the advisors, feed them in through your Teagasc central contact point with DAFM. ACA members can feed them in as well, private advisors, nitrates@agriculture.gov.ie. And the letter that we're going to send to dairy farmers will include that FAQ. So we want to make it as comprehensive as possible.
I suppose just one clarification, Finbarr, there was a question on a specific foliar and liquid fertilizers, but in essence, I think, am I right in saying that any product that is used to feed a crop, be it macro or micronutrient, is coming under the gambit of the fertilizer database?
Yeah, those foliar stuff, yeah, they come under it as well. So I suppose the domestic products are the only ones that don't come under it. And I suppose we're primarily concerned with the chemical fertilizers and the big use. But we have been asked these questions before, and yes, they will be in the system as well. Liquid fertilizers, foliar applications, all of those.
Okay, I'm afraid we're completely out of time here. We'll run over a little bit, but given the importance of this topic, I think it was well worthwhile. Ted and Finbarr, thank you so much for really excellent and clear presentations today. Pat, thanks for helping with the questions. And I want to say special thanks to Yvonne Mahers in the background, helping us with the technical side, and to Andy Boland, our series producer. Next week, we'll be joined by Dr. Edward Straw from the School of Agriculture and Food Science in University College Dublin. And he'll be talking about the impacts of pesticides on the environment and what the science says. So until next week, thanks for joining us. We certainly had a record crowd this morning. Huge interest in this topic. So no doubt we'll be touching on this again throughout the course of the year, given its significance on the industry. Once again, Ted and Finbarr, thanks for joining us, and we hope you have a lovely weekend. Thanks.
Cheers. Everyone. Thank you.